Hello and welcome to this very special broadcast called Recover and Rebuild, brought to you by Metro and the European Movement International. My name is Joe Lynham and I present a program on the BBC World Service called The Newsroom. Before that, for many years, I was a business and economics correspondent covering the dot-com crisis, covering the financial crisis, the Eurozone crises. But this pandemic and this story of the virus is the biggest story that I have ever covered. And it is a very worrying time for many Europeans. More than 100,000 have died over the past few months, and millions of Europeans are worried about their future. Will they be able to stay in work? Will they retain their jobs? They can't even shake hands with each other anymore or pat each other on the back, let alone give each other a hug or a kiss on the cheek. This will probably be the worst recession since the Second World War. The Commission itself yesterday predicted that the EU economy will shrink by 8.3% this year alone. And that was even worse than the previous forecast a few months ago. The Eurozone shrank by 17% in the first half of 2020. Unemployment in France and Italy is set to soar to 13% and 11% respectively. People need reassurance. They need to know that their political leaders and their institutions and their politicians and their companies will have their best interest. They need to know that the recovery will be swift and that they will be protected. Today, we'll be discussing what kind of help is on the way, what kind of help is already being shared with Europeans so that it can bounce back in a sustainable and digital way. We'll be asking three questions. What is the EU doing to minimize the economic damage from the lockdown? How can the EU ensure that money reaches the right sectors and people to build a sustainable economy? And what do companies want from their own national governments as well as the EU institutions so that they can provide the employment to get people back on their feet and to survive, because so many companies are in deep trouble. We have an absolutely galactic, amazing panel today. One of the most senior people in the European Commission, a former Prime Minister of Italy, no less, a member of the European Parliament, and the boss of one of Europe's biggest companies is joining us live. Remember, please, you can contribute. Now we can see our guests there briefly on the scene, Olaf, Clotilde, and Paolo Gentiloni. On the right-hand side, you will see comments, live comments. Please think of something interesting, because this is a very rare opportunity to speak to some of the most influential people in Europe with some of your questions. Tell us your name and who you work for or who you represent. Post it there, and I will try to put it to the panel. Remember, it is being recorded, and it is on the record. As you can see on the screen, Clotilde Armand is an MEP who sits on the Budget Committee in the European Parliament with the Renew Group, set up only last year, part of President Macron's Renew Group. Olaf Koch is the chair of the management board, or the boss, of Metro, which is the biggest wholesaler in Europe. Big wave to Olaf. It was his big birthday last month. Congratulations, Olaf. And Paolo Gentiloni is the Economic Affairs Commissioner at the European Commission and the former Prime Minister of Italy for 2 years, no less. And we, of course, send out all our best wishes to the people of Italy who have lost so many people in this awful virus in this time. Don't forget to post your questions because this is a rare opportunity. And as they say in Scotland, shy bairns get nae sweets, or shy children don't get any sweets. Please post your questions. I am going to go to the Commissioner first, if I may, Paolo Gentiloni, Commissario, and ask him, you published your forecast yesterday for the European Union, and it is very sobering. You spoke about the human story behind all these numbers and how this pandemic is also a story about poverty, inequality, and insecurity. Can you tell us what the EU Commission is doing to help Europe rebuild and recover after this horrendous pandemic?
Yes, indeed, I think that we have to be aware of how deep the crisis is and how deep the social consequences will be in the next months. The forecast we presented yesterday, I think, is more or less sending two messages. One is that, yes, recovery is slowly underway, but it is the road is paved with uncertainty. So we still have a very high degree of uncertainty on this recovery. And the second message is that even in the comparison with our forecast in spring and yesterday's forecast, we see differences among member states enlarging. What is, I think, interesting to and worrying to consider in this summer forecast is that the distance among different countries augmented and is supposed to increase also next year. So at the end of 2021, according to our forecast, we will have a few European member states back to their level of GDP of the end of 2019, and other member states 3, 4, 5 points behind the level of the end of 2019. What is the Commission and the European institution, what are the European institution doing? I think I would say maybe in an optimistic way, so far so good, because in fact, if we look to the decision taken from middle of March to the end of May, we had 3 waves of decision. First decision on our rules, state aid and fiscal rules, and ECB. Second wave, credit lines and loans decided for healthcare systems, small and medium enterprises, and short-time work scheme. And this was in April. And then at the end of May, the proposal of the Commission on this recovery fund, Next Generation EU. But all these decisions need to be implemented. And the last and the most important one, the recovery plan, need to be approved in next week. So when I say so far so good, I'm saying this because I think the reaction is very different from the one we had in the previous crisis. We were saying at the time too little and too late. Now we can perhaps say so far so good, but it depends on the approval of this decision from the European Council next week. And I think that yesterday's forecast is strengthening the rationale of our recovery package, which is to avoid disruption of the single market and excessive divergence and fragmentation among member states, because we have reaction from member states very strong and enabled by our decision of middle of March, a lot of expenditures from member states, but these expenditures, absolutely necessary and needed, are not reducing the risk of fragmentation and disruption in the single market. I could even say they risk to enhance these divergence. And the European package is targeted to avoid this divergence. And I really hope that it will be approved next week. And this would allow us to continue to say, so far, so good.
Can we focus a little bit on the European Recovery Fund, Commissioner? 750 billion euros. We all well, not all of us, most of us are aware of the fact that there is resistance. The famous Frugal Four, I Frugali, of Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Austria. They want most of the money of that 750 to be in the forms of loans and not of grants. What kind of progress are you making in terms of compromise? Because today we heard from Chancellor Merkel speaking in the European Parliament, talking about compromise, and people will have to compromise. What kind of compromise do you think will be agreed?
Well, it's not to me to define this compromise. If I honestly, I consider the proposal of the Commission a very good basis for a compromise, because the proposal of the Commission was not coming from a radical someone with strange ideas. It was the result of a very serious and solid assessment of the needs of the intervention. These needs are strongly confirmed by what we said yesterday in our forecast. They are confirmed by the risk of shortfall in private investment that we will face in the next couple of years. Someone could say, yes, but we are not yet seeing very alarming consequences from a social point of view. Unemployment rates are not comparable to what is happening in US. But my answer is consider the differences. Our system is keeping people employed with low decisions, with schemes, keeping people linked to their employment. We have also legal reasons, because many people is not asking for jobs during a lockdown, but this doesn't mean that the unemployment risk is low in the Union. We will see next autumn. It is connected to the risk of solvency of several companies, and also it is connected to the duration of these schemes of short-term or cassa integrazione or chômage partiel in different countries. They are not perpetual, these schemes. So the social consequences also are there. I think that the Commission proposal is very serious, and it is the sound basis to find a compromise. My suggestion
Sorry, Paolo, does the proposal for this recovery fund, is it a form of Eurobonds? Because this is something that the Northern Europeans are very nervous about, but what the Mediterranean countries, including Italy and Spain, are very keen on, a form of debt Europe-wide that will be kind of paid back through contributions to the European Union in future years.
Well, I think we have to be very clear in two things. One is this is not a new chapter of the discussion and the division we had in the previous 12 years. So we are not reopening this discussion. I think we have to, personally, I have a no regret attitude. The problem is not to demonstrate that we were wrong 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 7 years ago. The problem is that we are in a different book. It's not a new chapter of this story. And the difference is that we are not facing single countries with problems. We are facing a common problem. And to face this common problem, we decided to issue a common debt. We decided it already with this limited instrument called SURE. Also, this limited instrument called SURE is created through the Commission borrowing 100 billion in the markets. And then the whole package will be based on the Commission borrowing 750 billion on the markets, and connected to this based on the necessity to strengthen the Commission own resources. This is not, I repeat, the winners of the discussion on Eurobonds of the previous decade. This is a completely new story. Yes, we are issuing a common debt that we will repay with the union own resources, but we are doing this not to mutualize the debt accumulated in the previous decades, but we are doing this to face a common crisis and to avoid that the consequences of a common crisis would create difficulties for our single market and our euro area. This is the rationale.
I'm going to bring in Clotilde Armand, MEP, if I may. Clotilde, we spoke a little bit earlier about the risks of division, of North v South, of those countries less affected versus those countries more affected by this virus. I know you have a strong passion when it comes to EU cohesion, and especially the East-West division that might develop as a result of this pandemic. You are Franco-Romanian, half French, half Romanian. Would that be a fair description? So you've got a foot in both camps.
Well, Joe, I'm Romanian. I am a Romanian MEP. France has its own assets now. I'm a Romanian asset right now, and I think it's very important to explain some concepts which have been developing in Europe and that need to be better explained. You know, you were talking about the Frugal Four. And I've talked a lot with the MEPs, the member of parliaments of those Frugal Four, and I've felt that it is very important to explain where we are coming from the East and what is happening in Europe and in the discussions over the budget, over the MFF. We're talking about the recovery plan, but we had exactly the same discussions about the MFF. To achieve a better cohesion, one of the preconditions is to get rid of mistaken concepts, such as the concept of juste retour. And you see, I say it in French. I would like to use the few minutes that I have to highlight the responsibility of each of us to eliminate in the mind of the public the idea of juste retour or the idea of net position within the European budget. We need each of us to fight with the idea that the European budget is a redistribution mechanism where you are screwed if you give more than you receive, and where you are a charity beneficiary if you receive more than you contribute. This is not like this. This vision is untrue and perfect. Not only it does not reflect the reality, and it is our duty to tell the truth, but it leads to wrong conclusions and wrong moves, such as Euroscepticism. Actually, I have always noticed a kind of connivance or complicity from the Westerners to tolerate the idea that some countries are net beneficiaries, other countries are net contributors, and you will hear that all the time. And why do we have this complicity from Westerners? Because basically it puts Westerners or northern countries in a very nice light. They look like, the good guys who are the generous souls. But there will be a huge price in accepting those concepts instead of telling the truth. And what is the truth? The truth is that our common market has brought and will bring in the future a huge value to members. And this common market will be the instrument through which we will recover. It brings value to our citizens through our economies. Our economies can recover the cost. They can share the knowledge. They can access new markets. We have Metro here with us. They will tell us how how they could expand. They are everywhere in Romania, for instance. They have actually all the Western distribution companies like Metro have destroyed the local. There is no more Romanian distribution company, no more Romanian supermarkets and hypermarkets. So our citizens are getting more value for their money through this common market. But like any mechanism, it is not perfect. Some countries are better prepared and their companies get more than others from the common market. We can take each sector and we will see which companies are stronger, expand, conquer new markets, and which companies just die. A strong economy, well capitalized, well prepared to face fierce competition, will always want to be in a free trade area, such as the EU common market. On the opposite, smaller, badly prepared economies will always need some compensations to enter such free trade areas because they know that their economy will not resist in the competition. In order to function, the common market needs to be able to offer those compensations through the EU budget. And this is the role of those cohesion funds and part of the recovery funds. In other words, the contribution of each member in the common market or in the budget should be considered as a fee to enter the club, a club member fee in order to get the huge benefits of the common market. And those benefits are so good that we will see, because we will recover, that anyway, this membership fee outweigh by far, the benefits outweigh by far the membership fee. And I think the UK, who doesn't want to pay this membership fee anymore, they will realize that the benefits were huge.
Okay, Claude. Obviously, we don't want to get into a big Brexit discussion. I'm going to bring in Olaf Koch, if I may, given the fact you mentioned him and his company. Olaf is the boss of Metro, the biggest wholesaler in Europe. Olaf, you may want to address something that Clotilde mentioned there about distribution being shared around the continent. But first of all, tell us how your business has been affected by the lockdown and the pandemic.
Yeah, well, thank you. We have been impacted, of course, severely. I mean, our business is not the business of a supermarket or a discount market. We, as a wholesaler, we are supporting the small entrepreneurs, so the restaurant owner, the bistro owner, the small grocer, and as such, many of them have seen their business locked down as of end of March, and that had severe impact also on our business. Even more so, supply chains were disrupted, borders were closed, and it looked like we all have been fighting for that single market for so long, and then all of a sudden it vanished. And that was quite worrying because it looked like national interest is way above the European interest. I think some weeks after, things came back a bit more to normal, and as we have engaged very strongly to support the independent entrepreneurs, we also could help them to restart. And restarting the hospitality sector has been one of our main ambitions as of the beginning of the crisis. So in the worst time, gastronomy was down 75 to 80%, depending on the country. We as Metro have been down 25%, which means we certainly have reached out to customers and have supported them way beyond what has happened in other places. And through May, when we saw the reopening happening in Germany, and then in Southern Europe, and then luckily also in Italy, which is great because the hospitality sector in Italy is such a inspiring industry. We have been now coming back almost to like-for-like break even. So we're getting through this crisis, and it feels like we're getting through this crisis stronger. And I would like to address what Clotilde has mentioned about the large companies being an enemy of the small. I fully disagree, and certainly for Romania, because in Romania, we are fostering the independent grocers. We are giving them tools that they can use to be competitive against the international chains. And if they want to, they can even use one of our brands, which is a franchise brand, but you stay independent, which is called La Doi Pash, because it's our passion. It's our passion to keep that independent entrepreneurship, because we are convinced that part of the culture of Europe, is it in the hospitality sector, but also in the grocery sector, is that local footprint. And by and large, the hospitality sector is an independent sector. It's run by that nice entrepreneur, that nice lady that runs that cafe, the nice gentleman that runs this fantastic restaurant that you love to go there on the weekend or for business lunch or dinner. And these guys are representing a quite sizable business. I mean, we are talking here about roughly 500 billion of total volume. We're talking about 1.8 million entrepreneurs. They represent actually 8% of the workforce in Europe. So my wish also to the European Commission is, when we talk about differences like Clotilde mentioned between the East and the West, I would like to emphasize, let's not forget the small business, because they represent such a strong economic factor, such a strong labor factor, but even more so, they represent a huge part of the European culture. And if they would not get the support, not only the economics would be bad for the countries, because in some countries in the South, tourism is up to 25% of the GDP. So there would be a devastating economic impact, but the even more damaging impact would be quality of life. And that's what we would like to address and what we are fighting for.
Okay, thank you very much, Olaf. Just to remind all of you out there that the hashtag for this discussion is hashtag WSBRU, Wednesday Social Brussels. WSBRU is the hashtag, so please give your comments. I'll read one or two of the comments and questions, and then I'll come back to Commissioner Gentiloni, if I may. A question from Anonymous. How do you follow the implementation of EU proposals at a national level? Even if the EU proposals are positive, the member states' implementation is often disastrous. A question from the Sub-Director of European Remanufacturing Council. To repay the new European bonds, can we expect a European carbon tax or plastic packaging tax? A question from Arthur Tenfolde from Ecopreneur, representing 3,000 green SMEs. What are you doing to attach green strings to a 100% recovery, now 25%, I'm not sure quite what he means, now 25% of EU recovery funds, and the MFF, which is the multi-annual financial framework, which is another way of saying the budget. Let me come back to the Economy Commissioner, Paolo Gentiloni, about the tools that the European Commission has to get people or to keep them in work. How do you keep people in work if they're working for companies which could be described as zombie companies, i.e. companies that don't really have a long-term future, Commissioner? They are surviving thanks to national government support and very low interest rates. Should the European Commission, should the EU be supporting zombie companies?
Definitely not. If you look to what happened in the last 3 months, we decided 16th or 17th of March to adopt a temporary framework for state aid, suspending our normal rules in the single market for state aid, and allowing member states to intervene in supporting companies with a level unprecedented and not allowed by the normal rules. This enabling decision was followed by member states very strongly. Decision authorized by the Commission since middle of March are, I think, 210 national requests of use of this temporary framework for 8 states, and these more than 200 authorization overall make an amount of 2.3 billion euros of state aid. You know that there was also a discussion because this amount is not distributed equally in relation to their GDP and population among member states. There is a strong concentration, especially in Germany, reaching more or less 45% of this 2.3 billion of state aid. But this state aid is not allowed for companies that were in crisis or zombie, as you said, before the COVID crisis. Now the problems that we will have in the next months is that gradually we have to introduce a more stable framework of state aid rules, because as the CEO of Metro, Olaf, was saying, we need our single market with its competition with big and small enterprises. And definitely we don't want to transform European economy in a protectionist economy. But this will be a gradual process, and that will be coupled with entering in force of new mechanism to support companies from the risk of insolvency. This new mechanism will, I think, be in place in October, November, and it is also targeted to countries where the state aid is not sufficient. There is no sufficient fiscal power from the country to make its own state aid, but the Union can decide that we can have enterprises with strategic importance, even not big enterprises, but you can have an enterprises with 50 employees, which is in a specific sector and has a strategic value. And you can't allow these enterprises to have insolvency because their member state has not the fiscal power to intervene. So we will have several tools, but not for zombie companies.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I will give Olaf a chance to get in on some of that single market stuff that you were talking about. First, I'm going to go to Clotilde, and you are an elected official. Is there a risk that some of your voters may decide that the priority should be getting people back to work and not pursuing climate change targets and introducing big changes to meet the new Green Deal, that the priority should be getting people back to work? Clotilde.
Yes, Joe, I am from Renew. So first of all, we're dedicated to getting a strong economy back, and there is no conflictual goal in the Green Deal and getting back people to work, because we believe that actually the Green Deal is going to create value, economic value. You know that Europe has lost its leadership when it's about digital, and this is something we need to talk about. But we want to be again new leaders, but in this new field, in which we will invest a lot, which is the ecological economy, if you want, the green economy. So this green economy is a way for Europe to regain its leadership role. So it is a huge new market in which we want to be the leaders. I just wanted to mention as well something. I am a liberal, as I was saying, because I am from Renew. So I believe in the magic hand of the market. So my remark on Metro, and I apologize if I was being aggressive, was not something, it was not a reproach. It was an observation. Metro was better in what it is doing than other companies in and actually in the eastern side, companies were not as good as Metro, and Metro was the best. And I believe that Metro is actually bringing value to the customers. This is why, again, I believe in this magic hand of the market.
Well, do you want me to back to Olaf?
Is that if the added value is clear, from Metro and from other companies who are strong and who are basically being the best. But you need a compensation measure because you want to help as well the poorest economies to recover from this crisis, but from as well the previous crisis that took place 30 years ago. It is difficult to know which companies to save, coming back to the previous discussion. But one of the factors that is important to mention here is the fact that we still, even if we don't want zombies company, and we want the strongest company to be the ones who survive, but at the same time we have to be cautious about external factors such as Chinese companies buying out our companies, and even more in the infrastructure field. So again, I believe that the Green Deal is a chance, is an opportunity, and we need to go there because we will be leader in that. And this is a field where we can actually be better than the Chinese, for instance. We don't need to intervene too much because we need the best companies to be the ones who survive and who bring value to our customers. But at the same time, we have to pay attention to what's happening with external factors such as the Chinese, and even more in infrastructure field.
Well, that is a very good point. And let me bring in Olaf Koch, the boss of Metro AG. Olaf, first of all, you're all back friends, you and Clotilde, which is great. Has the single market been weakened, would you say, by the coronavirus?
Well, I think it's a fact. It was very much weakened end of March, and then throughout the month of April, when I told you before that we witnessed huge disruption in the supply chain. And there's another phenomena which I think we are all familiar with is when there's a crisis, people get afraid. Fear leads to reflex, and quite often the reflex is protectionism. And I can only be a strong advocate against the protectionism. I'm a true believer in the power of the market, like Clotilde was saying, and I very much would second what Commissioner Gentiloni has been saying, that we need to take this moment in time of the crisis, use the funds that hopefully will be approved, but then let's turn them into opportunity, because the opposite of protectionism is empowerment. And if we empower the industries that now have suffered the most with intelligent allocation of funds, but even more so, intelligent allocation of education and development, then I'm pretty much convinced we can turn out of this crisis way stronger than before, as a European Union that is much closer to each other than it was before. And let me give you an example. There was the question, is there contradiction between saving jobs and the Green Deal? I can witness from my sector, it goes hand in hand. If you look into a restaurant right now, one of the biggest problems they have is waste. And even in times now of post-COVID-19, or still in the middle of COVID-19, but post-lockdown, what's your biggest problem? Your biggest problem is you buy too much and you throw away a lot. And why is that still happening? Because it's not driven by data. Most people are refilling their supply chain by the gut, by the assessment on how might tomorrow be, what kind of volume do I need. That can be modernized. We are doing that, by the way, for a lot of our customers, and we can reduce their waste by almost 50%. That's good for the restaurant. They earn more money. That's good for the neighborhood because there's less waste and therefore less pollution and less burden on the infrastructure. And you might then wonder, well, but it's not good for Metro because you guys are selling less. I don't care. I don't care we sell less, but I care that you don't waste. And if you understand that we are in the interest of your business, the effect is always the same. You will buy more with us because you will trust that we are seriously committed to contribute to your success. So my big wish out of this crisis is that we leave the fear behind, and that we turn it into eagerness and togetherness. That's what Europe should be. And even on a geopolitical side of things, I think it's the time now as Europe to come closer together.
Okay, Olaf, some strong words. Let me bring in Commissario Paolo Gentiloni again. Two questions. First of all, about the role that China might be playing in future. It is a rapidly growing empire, and there is a risk, and Clotilde made reference to it, that it might buy up weaker European companies because they might be going cheap, and so broaden their influence in Europe. And the second question is, Germany has taken over the presidency of the European Union at such a key time. Does that matter? Does it matter that the biggest and wealthiest country is now in the driving seat of the EU presidency? Two questions there, Paolo.
Yes, indeed. There is potentially a risk of, in a crisis, of having European companies playing a strategic role in several sectors, exposed to external acquisition. I think that several member states took decisions in these months to strengthen different means to avoid this in telecommunications, in strategic digital services, in security, of course, etc. Then we are discussing with the Chinese authorities. We had a discussion as a commission 10 days ago, and we will continue this discussion after the summer pause, because we don't want to react to these dangers with a protectionist reaction, but we need to reach the basis of reciprocity, which is not there. So protection should be limited to strategic assets in our companies, but in general, what is needed is not protecting against other countries like China, but is asking and obtaining reciprocity, because we are open, we are an open single market, we are for free trade, but we are not accepting that free trade means only a one-way decision. So free trade needs reciprocity, and some progress is needed from this point of view, because I think we are not yet on the right track. So protecting some strategic sector, but not protecting our single market, but asking in our single market for reciprocity. And then, sorry, Joe, I don't remember your second question.
Angela Merkel was in the European Parliament. Germany is the rotating president.
I consider this to be frank and honest, a very good opportunity, because, well, if we were able to make such an ambitious proposal as European Commission, this was also because of the progress of the awareness of the necessity of a common reaction in Germany, completely changing views that for years appeared to be unchangeable. And if there is a leader that can give a contribution also from a negotiating point of view to reach a solution in this very, very complicated negotiation. This leader is the Chancellor, because I also, in my experience in the European Council for a couple of years, I know that we have a very good negotiator. I am happy of the fact that in this crucial moment in Europe, we have, among other people, three important women. This is, I think, something that could bring something positive.
Okay, well, let's go to another leading European woman, Clotilde. You were in the chamber today, the European Parliament chamber, when Kanzlerin Merkel spoke. Did she tell you what you wanted to hear?
Well, Joe, her key word was together. And then she had 5 points. The first one was fundamental rights. The second one was cohesion. The third one was the Green Deal or climate change. The fourth one was digital Europe. And the fifth one was Europe in the world. And yes, it is what I wanted to hear. We have, I put a lot of hope in the German presidency. Mrs. Merkel has always, and her team, they've always understood that Germany is one of the main winners. Everybody's winner, but she's the very strong winner of the common market. She knows that you shouldn't be speaking in terms of net beneficiary and net contributors, because she knows that this concept is basically mistaken. She understands very well that Germany can only win with a strong Europe, and she wants a strong Europe. I believe that what she's doing, fundamental rights, it is very important. We have been in this COVID crisis where we don't even, we're missing those fundamental rights. We want to recover on that side, on this perspective as well. Cohesion is something very important to us, because, as I said before, the common market can only work if we have this cohesion, and it is important to have a strong Europe. The Green Deal is something that all citizens we want. That in the local elections that took place 1 week ago, I believe, in France, the citizens expressed this, that they really want to have to be very serious on the Green Deal, on climate change, on something much more close to a healthy way of life. Digital is something extremely important to all of us. Eastern countries have rebuilt their economy, and one of the pillars of this economy is actually the digital economy. So this is something important to all of us, West and East. And Europe in the world is something that we must assume. We are the ones who believe in values that are important to the rest of the world. If we want to be a leader, and if we want to be an ethical leader, because being a leader means as well having some responsibilities, and it is important that we assume those responsibilities. So yes, I was very happy with the speech of Mrs. Merkel.
Okay, thank you very much, Clotilde. Just to remind everyone out there that the hashtag is WSBRU, and you can, of course, submit your questions on the right-hand side in the live comments. Let me read one or two comments that we have had, and then I'll put one or the two of them maybe come to Olaf next. So stand by, Olaf. A question from Kaka Nadaridze from AFRD in Georgia. Free trade agreement between developing low-income countries with EU member countries, China, etc. Which country would benefit more from a free trade agreement? Question from Catherine Dimitrioulias. Petros is going to kill me for mispronouncing this. Catherine Dimitrioulias, the president of AFEM Women. Half of all Europeans have been disproportionately hit by this pandemic crisis. What are the economic measures that the EU can take to help gender equality? And a question from someone who didn't give their name. Is it necessary, Olaf Koch, for the public to help for the modernization of small and medium-sized companies, but not zombies, they stress, as Metro is doing, for example, in the hospitality SME sector? Olaf.
Yeah, well, I'm convinced that if the investment into those small businesses, also from the authorities, would materialize, it would lead to a huge payback. It would lead to a huge payback, as I said before, for those independent entrepreneurs. But I think for the whole society, when I talked about the basically 500 billion, 500 billion turnover, and the fact that this is represented by 1.8 million entrepreneurs, I also want to be totally transparent. This business has not been modernized like the chained food system or large chains of hotels. Many of these businesses are still operating on a very basic operating model. So if we all take the chance to, first of all, acknowledge that those entrepreneurs are enriching our lives, they are a huge part of the quality of life. They give us the diversity of Italian food, French food, Romanian food, German food. I mean, these guys are entertainers in a certain way of the quality of life that we take as a given. It's not a given. In the crisis, you will see that many of them are suffering right now a lot. But if we help them to modernize, the upside potential and the efficiency boost that we can bring to that industry is significant. And yes, we as Metro, we are doing that. And it's nice that you call us a very large company. But in comparison to the size of the sector, we are small. We are running a business with 27 billion. When we talk about 500 billion of turnover, we are comparatively small. And therefore, yes, I would wish for a public-private partnership to really now double down on this huge opportunity that can boost the economics of those small entrepreneurs. This can happen in a more sustainable way so that they also make a contribution to the Green Deal. And the result of it would be a flourishing hospitality sector, including the tourism, that will make Europe even more attractive for visitors from around the world. And let's not forget that tourism, as I said before, is up to 25% of GDP in many countries, predominantly also in Southern Europe. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and I would hope for that now that we have hopefully the funds approved, that the SMEs will get their fair share of potential.
Yeah, it's a good point that tourism and hospitality is absolutely vital for the European economy, and we are seeing member states talking about slashing value-added tax or sales tax on hotels and restaurants in the coming years. Let's see what the member states do about that. Can I come to Paolo Gentiloni again? And we're coming towards the end of our broadcast. And it's to do with the modernization of the European economy and the digitalization of the European economy. Do you think the EU should now press ahead with a digital tax on the likes of Facebook and Google, given the fact that the Americans would go crazy and potentially impose retaliatory tariffs on European cars? And also, would you think that imposing a digital tax would help Europe find its own Google, Facebook, or Amazon?
Well, I don't see a clear connection between the digital taxation which is needed and the potentiality of having European digital champions, so to say. These two things can be cooperating each other, but they could also be independent. So as far as the potentiality of European companies to grow and have a global role, I don't think that this is an impossible story, because I think we have to consider the fact that the level of the speed of changes in this is extremely high. And we are approaching a new chapter based on big data, AI, and if we are able to coordinate research and investment at European level, it cannot be excluded that the supremacy that is there now from American and Chinese giants will remain also in a next phase that we will have. As far as the digital taxation is concerned, I think everybody understands, and I would say even more after this lockdowns, the importance of this business and the fact that taxation of this business cannot be connected to the physical presence of companies, of industries in this or that country. So we need a taxation based on where the services and the revenues are collected. And this means that we need a global taxation. We are trying to reach an agreement on a global taxation since now almost 1 year at the level of the G20 and OECD, both on the minimal taxation and on the digital taxation. What is interesting is that the giants of the digital platforms are not against this. I met most of the CEOs of these giants in recent weeks and months, and they understand the need of having taxation, and they only fear to have too many taxation, double, triple, quadruple taxation in different countries. So now I think we have to insist in trying to reach an agreement at the global level, despite the fact that the US government practically freezed this search for an agreement, not leaving the table of negotiation, but freezing it. I understand that this is also, everybody understands that this is also connected to the fact that we are in an election year in America. And so we will not consider this effort for a global solution as concluded, but definitely if we have no result in the next 6 months in this global arena, we will come in the first semester of next year with a proposal of a European digital taxation. Also because we have already French, Italian, Austrian, Czechian taxation, and possibly also UK and Spain soon. So we can't have 7, 8, 10 different digital taxation. We need either a global one, which will be by large the best solution also for the digital companies, or if this will reveal impossible this year, next year we will put on the table a European digital taxation proposal.
Well, on that note of a digital tax, which will either be global or EU-wide, we're going to wind up the discussion now. It has been a very interesting discussion. We've heard a lot of different perspectives on this. Recovery and rebuild. All I could say is that the debate can continue online at #WSBRU. This discussion will be put up on the website Brussels-Wednesdaysocial.eu. That is Brussels-WednesdaySocial.eu. So you can watch it all again and pretend it's live and post your questions, even though nobody will get them. Anyway, I would like to thank Clotilde Armand, the MEP. Thank you very much, Clotilde. Merci. Olaf Koch, the boss of Metro. Vielen Dank. And molto gentile, Paolo Gentiloni. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your time. And let's get to work, as they say. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.